Right, we seem to be evening out, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Amy Thompson. I'm the College and Career Counselor at Hillsborough High School. I'm excited to welcome the class of 2024 to kind of your first big kickoff for your post-high school planning. With me this evening, I have a good part of our school counseling department. I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves in just a second. A little housekeeping first. This session is being recorded. It will be posted to my YouTube channel probably by sometime next week. Throughout the session, we will be using the Q&A functionality, which is located on your screen. You'll see Q&A. If you ask a question, it'll come to us. Our counselors will be staffing that throughout the presentation, answering those questions. When the questions come back, they will come back for everybody to see what the answer is, so that you kind of know where that is. And then I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Before I let these guys start introducing themselves, I just want to account for a couple folks who aren't able to join us tonight. Mrs. Povell, who has juniors with letters B-O-R-E to D-E-L-T, is not able to join us tonight. She's under the weather. Mrs. Stewart-Sayre is also under the weather tonight. She has students with last names M-A-D through N-A-R. Also, I want to account for Mrs. Costa. She and Ms. Gallagher are kind of one and the same right now. Ms. Gallagher is our long-term sub for Ms. Costa, and she will be here as long as we need her to be. And then also Mr. Projan is out on leave. We do anticipate that he will be back later this winter. Those who do have Mr. Projan assigned to them are assigned to Mr. Projan. Normally, you've been reassigned in Genesis, so if you're unsure of who your person is, you can check there to see who your counselor is, and we can, square that away if we need to. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Ms. Housel, who is at the start of our alphabet.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mrs. Housel. I'm located in the upstairs office, and I work with students with the last names beginning A through B-O-R-D.
Hi, everyone. I'm Toby Flagg. My office is also in upstairs guidance. I work with juniors from DEL through GO.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Gallagher, and as Amy Thompson mentioned, I am replacement for Mrs. Costa. So if you have any questions regarding students with the last name of GR to JON, I'm here to help you.
Good evening. My name is Jaleesa Williamson. I'm located in the upstairs counseling office. I have last names JOO to MAC.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Regitz. My caseload is RAL to SEL, and I'm also covering for Mr. Projan with the letters of PHI to RAK.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Jacobson. I am a school counselor in the downstairs department. My juniors' last names go from SEM to TRE, and I am also covering for Mr. Projan's juniors with the last names NIK to PANDI.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Aziza Hassan. My office is located downstairs. I am covering juniors with the last name TRU to the last of the alphabet, C. And I'm also covering Mr. Projan's students with the last name of PAR to Paul.
Right, thanks everyone. I'll let you guys go ahead and click off so you can start manning that Q&A before those questions start to roll in. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started tonight. All right, so welcome to tonight's program. This just gives you a quick idea of what we will be covering today. We'll be starting out with kind of covering the college search functionality, moving into a short section about the two-year colleges, spending the bulk of our time on the four-year application process, and then moving on into the financial aid section. All right. So before we get kind of into a whole lot else, I just wanted to start by giving you an idea of what is coming ahead. So this isn't just kind of like a one-time we do this event and then you don't really hear from us again at all. what we're going to be doing is we start out with this kickoff event, and then we'll be moving immediately into junior groups with the school counselors that you just heard from. The school counselors have already booked time, but have appointments all scheduled. You'll be starting to get students emails in the coming days. They will be doing junior groups over the next 2 to 2.5 weeks. Yes, some people have to go first, some people have to go last. We only have so much space in our building, but everybody will get seen in a small group setting. And that's going to cover some of what we have covered tonight, but also in a more hands-on way, where we're getting our students involved using SCOIR and getting familiar with everything there. Don't mind me, I'm just having to move some of my things around a little bit. We will then move into a setting where students can request individual appointments with their school counselors and also with me. That'll be ongoing throughout the spring. We kind of sprinkle those in around our other obligations that we all have, including grade level scheduling and individual scheduling, which will happen during kind of that Marchish timeframe. I will be seeing all of our students later this year. I'll be doing junior groups in March and April, where we'll cover some more things about balancing student lists, kind of the different early action, early decision, other types of policies, things that they might be a little bit more ready for when we get to that March-April timeframe. We are bringing back our high school college fair this year. I'm super excited. It's our first one since 2019. And that will be March 22nd in the evening in the high school gyms. We typically have about 150 schools in attendance, so it is a big program. We'll also be having, once again, our college admission panel presentation. That's an evening presentation. We're moving that till April this year. If you didn't attend last year, that is a very good event that people tend to really enjoy very much. Where we have actual college admission representatives who work with students from our high school that come on, and they're answering questions about admissions as a whole, not so much specific to their institution, but to give you a better idea of really kind of a behind the scenes view of how things work. And then we'll move on into college essay writing. I'll cover a little bit of that tonight, but rest assured that will be covered later this year in your English classes. I don't know that anybody has done it just yet. Typically, that is something that they'll do as kind of a last assignment, fourth marking period kind of thing in that May-June timeframe. And then we'll have another round of optional groups before the end of the year, where we'll have students start working on their common application before they head into the summer. We do have a lot of other resources that are out there for you, including our college application guide. We've moved away from print materials, put everything on the web. In the email that you received with the link to tonight's program, you will see that there's a link to the site, and it's really kind of the best place for you to be going to get all of the information that you might need. There are much more detailed videos about different sections of tonight's presentation that you can go to view as well. Without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. One thing I do want to mention is you'll see throughout the presentation these kind of black and white boxes. Those come straight from Instagram. I've asked our students and parents to give some different feedback and then sprinkled that throughout. So if there are spelling errors, they're not mine, but I've taken it straight from our students to give you that kind of information, because I think their perspective means honestly a lot more than mine. All right, so let me give you a little lay of the land of what's going on right now, because I know we have a lot of first timers, and then we probably also have some folks who have perhaps an older kid. They haven't gone through this in 4 or 5 years, and you're kind of terrified because you heard so much change. Well, some things have changed. We are in a land now where most schools are test optional, which means that SAT and ACT are mostly not required. Still, though, strong scores help. It is true that applications are up at many schools, especially more highly selective schools. That does tend to result in more defers and wait lists. So it is very important that students have a balanced list, and we work with them on that because we want to make sure everybody has a place for after they graduate. We are still seeing that some schools are considering demonstrated interest, which means that the students has evidenced in some way that they have interest in this college. That's things like visiting, meeting with them at our college fair, opening emails, attending online programs, things like that. That matters with some schools, but not all schools. And so that's something you might hear about kind of in the media, but realize that it's not going to make a difference everywhere. There is really an increased emphasis on fit for the college in question. So again, another reason to have a really good, well thought out list. as we're going through the process. Just to give you an idea about what happened with last year's group, this is the class of 2022. So on the left column there, you'll see our schools that are most popular to attend. We do typically kind of have a number in the 90s for RVCC and two-year college. We have a sprinkling of students that will go to other two-year colleges. And then, so that usually works out to be about 18% of our class, and then about 70 to 75% of our class or so is going on to four-year schools. You could see our most popular. Rutgers is kind of our number one every year. That's probably not really a surprise. That's gone up really since COVID. When I first started about 5 or 6 years ago, we were usually kind of hanging in the 60s and 70s, but now we've been in the 90s since COVID. So we are seeing more students going to Rutgers. The rest of the list really does kind of change by year. Some of them are sort of always there. I feel like UDEL is always on the list. TCNJ is always on the list. Rowan's on the list, but the others really kind of change from year to year. There's definitely fluctuation in the hot schools that are out there. On the right side, you will see some of our selective college matriculations and what is going on with those different schools that are out there. And that is last year's matriculation. So that's in terms of who is actually attending those institutions, not who got in. Some early news from our class of 2023, so our current seniors. We have gotten back our first round of early decision results, so you'll see those in the left column, some of our students have been admitted. In addition, we have a handful of students who have applied to a variety of other schools. Some of them are athletes, some of them are not, who have also been admitted to ED schools. On the right side, this is kind of what's going on in terms of other students who have heard. We have a large number of our students who have already gotten at least one college acceptance in their pocket. We're kind of running at about 225 different schools or so with acceptances right now. So we're super excited for that senior group. And it's really exciting to think for you all that by this time next year, you'll probably have some college acceptances already that you know about before we even roll into winter break. So it's coming quickly. But how do we get started? I think that's one of the things that's hardest, especially for families who haven't done this before. What I really recommend is to honestly start not by thinking about specific schools, but really start by thinking about who you are and what you want in an institution. And I think that one of the things that's most important is to really kind of try to block out some of the noise around you and think about what is truly best for your child or students, for yourself, not necessarily your friends, your peer group, etc. Because what's best for them may not be what's best for you. There are some different things. I've got some resources out here for you to try to work on figuring out what you're looking for and to kind of prioritize. And that's not necessarily just in the way of sort of concrete things like I want a big school, small school, or location. It's also in terms of what type of school you're looking for, what type of learner you are, whether you're looking for collaborative or competitive environments, different factors like that. There are a little bit harder to pin down, but are more about the personality of the school. So those are things to start looking for because that'll keep you really focused as you're starting to really comb through all of these schools that are out there and visit them. You kind of keep coming back to that. Well, what is it really looking for? And is it really going to serve my needs? Now, when I think about finding the right fit, I kind of feel like there's three general areas. I look at it as kind of like a pizza pie. We've got social and environmental fit, financial fit, and academic fit. And here in my picture, you know, they're all pretty. They're three equally sized pieces of the pie, but the reality is that that's not the case for most students, right? It's not an equal balance. For some people, different areas take on more importance than others. And that's going to be different for every student and for every family. First thing though, when we're talking about academic fit, the biggest thing to really think about is if you do have an academic area of interest in mind, does that school offer that academic area of interest? Is it one of their strengths? Is it a larger major or smaller major? And which are you looking for? Do you prefer to be one of, you know, several hundred or several thousand students of that major? Or are you really looking for something where you'll be a smaller number and maybe have a closer relationship with faculty members? In terms of academic rigor, really, are you looking for to be a kind of big fish in a small pond, small fish in a big pond? Are you looking to go to the most competitive, challenging place you can go to? Or are you looking for a place where you're kind of more of a balance? Are you looking for a place where, you know, you'll be challenged sometimes, but you know that, on the whole, it's going to be a place where you'll be able to really be successful, and maybe rise towards the top of your class. Everybody's different. You have to think about what is the best environment for you to be successful and to keep you motivated throughout your 4 years of college, and also the things that are going to give you the best chance to be able to take advantage of the many resources that are available on a school's campus. Right? Because what we're going to hear about as you start looking at schools and attending visits and all those things, you're going to hear tons of things about internships and clubs and study abroad and all of these other things that are out there. And what you want, though, is you want to make sure that you're balancing that academic piece with the ability to take advantage of all of those other things that you got so excited about. So if you're working so hard on a daily basis that you can't even dig yourself out from underneath the coursework, you're not going to shine to be able to do research with those professors, nor are you going to have the time to do so. So you really kind of need to balance those couple of things out. You want to look and see what types of things each school has. You're going to find that every school has all of these to some degree. So because when someone says, oh, we have research, well, I'll be honest, so does everybody else. But you want to look at what they're actually doing, when are those opportunities available, and to what percentages of their students. So those are good questions to ask as you're starting to get in there and do open houses and go to visits. Then we look at social and environmental fit. So that's some of the basic factors. Honestly, these are some of the first things we go over with students. They are things like a location. Do you want to go to a school that's in state or out of state? Do you want to be able to come home on the weekends? Do you want mom and dad to be able to stop by for Thursday night dinner? Do you want to be a plane ride away and you only want to come home for winter break? This time of year is when people start to care about climate a lot. When we get to this time of year, I start to hear a lot of like, the South sounds really good. I'm not so interested in staying in the Northeast anymore. So is that something that's important to you? How big of a place? Hillsborough is a fairly big high school. We're about 2,400 students. That in terms of a university kind of falls on the large side of a small and the small size of a medium. In terms of kind of the scale. You're going to see schools that are a third the size of Hillsborough High School. And you are also going to see schools that are more than 10 times the size of Hillsborough High School and everywhere in between. So I strongly recommend that students kind of, if you don't know what you want, check out a number of different sizes of schools as well, because you might find that maybe what you like is different than kind of that preconceived notion that's in your head of different sizes of schools. There's all kinds of other things that might be important to students, but really what you're looking for is a place that is going to be a good fit for you, a place that's going to challenge you socially, maybe that's a little bit different, at least from high school. It's going to challenge you socially, but a place that at the end of the day, you still feel comfortable and feel like it is going to be your home, because it really is going to be your home, hopefully, for the next 4 years. In terms of financial fit, this is a little bit different from everybody. For some people, this is the greatest amount of importance. And for others, it's not all that significant. And it's more about value than it is the dollar amount that they're laying out. Some things to think about are the cost of attendance of the school, and we'll go over a whole financial aid section a little later in this presentation. So I'm not going to go too detailed now. Things like merit scholarship availability, and really kind of what I just said, that value. I feel like we have a lot of conversations after students are admitted and they've got financial aid packages in front of them of, is it worth it? And that answer is different for some families than others. But it is something that you kind of have to come to terms with. And it is something I definitely recommend that students try to come, at least to some degree, to terms with before they apply, so that they're also applying to schools that they could realistically attend and would realistically pay for. And then we're not applying to a whole bunch of schools where the funding is just not there, or the family doesn't necessarily see the value in paying that amount for that particular school. So we have a lot of conversations about that, especially in regards to Rutgers and TCNJ versus some of the very expensive private schools that are out there. And whether, is it always worth applying to some of those schools that aren't reach schools, but might cost $70,000 that are in between. So what are some things that you can use? We're going to be using the Discover search in SCOIR, and that is something that our counselors will be going over students with you in the next 2 weeks in your groups. You're going to be kind of getting some hands-on things there. I personally like College Express, which is why I highlighted that one, because I have a book. When you come in and meet with me, sometimes I'll like pull out this book. You're like, what are you doing? It's the print version of the stuff on College Express. I like this thing that is lists and rankings, and it is not rankings in the sense of like US news rankings or poets and quant rankings. It's more, they call it rankings. It's more lists. But what I like is that it's got some things there about academics. So sometimes it's really helpful for me to find some suggestions of maybe strong programs, like list of schools that have strong programs in computer science or computer engineering or architecture or a variety of different things. So not just a program, but something that may be a little bit more known for. But I also like some of their things that are a little bit softer. So I like to look at things like, schools that have school spirit, schools that are good for the crunchy granola kid, schools that are good for the introvert, schools that are friendly, things like that, because I feel like that speaks more to the personality of the school. And a lot of times that's what, we as counselors can get a better impression about from a student. We kind of know, that school may not be such a great fit for that kid. I've known them for a couple of years and I just don't really see them there in terms of personality, but this other place might be a great fit for them. So those lists do a really good job of that. Also, I've shown a link there for our high school class of 2022 admitted by GPA. So I do maintain that list every year. So what you'll see right now is it is located, I'll just hop over to our application guide. This is that link that I was showing you before. I have this class of 2022 outcomes here. This is always very popular. And I put together every year the stats after the current senior class leaves. So last year's class, average number of applications was about 8. 72 kids applied to 15 or more schools, 19 applied to 20 or more schools. And then I have by GPA bands, kind of some stats about them, where they were accepted, where they were waitlisted, denies, attending. I find that that is really helpful for students and for parents to get an idea about what is really realistic for students in that GPA range. And I really, really find after, 16 years of doing this, that GPA and kind of that type of academic student that they are is really a much better indicator of, where they're likely to be accepted than things like test scores. But hopefully that is helpful to you. I will update that at the end of this year with our class of 2023 data. But I think that the 2022 data is going to be pretty helpful to you in the meantime. I have mentioned a bunch of times, you heard me say visit, 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 and I really do mean it. I think that was one of the biggest losses for students that were kind of in that COVID times period, is that they were unable to visit schools in person, and it really made it difficult for many students to make a decision. We are in a different place now, so students really do have that availability to go and take a tour of schools, and I encourage you to do so. For some schools, as I mentioned, it is, they do track visits. It can be a measure of demonstrated interest, but also oftentimes students find when they get to a school that it may or may not be what they kind of built it up as in their head. Sometimes it's even better, and sometimes it's just not for them. When they get on campus, and parents, I'll tell you, if you go on a bunch of tours, you're going to get to some schools and your kid is going to have absolutely zero excitement at one of them. And you probably thought it was going to be fantastic, and they're going to get there and like drag out of the car and not even going to want to be on the tour because they already kind of know it's not the place for them. But the best time to figure that out is really before they, apply. It's in this stage of the process. It's also a great way to look at types of schools. So if you feel like you have no guidance at all, I recommend starting with schools that are like 2 to 3 hours from here. Hit a big school, small school, maybe a specialized school. So if my kid's thinking, maybe I want to do engineering, I would probably go and check out Rutgers. I'd check out TCNJ, I'd check out NJIT and or Stevens. In doing so, I will have looked at a large public state school. I will have looked at a smaller public school that is more of a liberal arts college type of environment in TCNJ. And I'll have checked out a specialized technology school in either Stevens or NJIT. And that will tell you right there student visits those schools, they are not all the right fit for the same kid. And that will help them further direct as to where they want to go. If they love it in JIT or Stevens, then we are packing that list with RPI, RIT, WPI, and some other schools. If they don't, then we are just keeping those specialized schools off their list altogether. And that's something that they can really, I feel like, see more when they go and they visit. So be aware though, make sure you're checking. You do need to sign up for visits in advance, register for them. They do book pretty well in advance. So if you're hoping to do kind of like a spring break swing, start looking for those things later this month. You can look now, start looking later this month. Don't wait until sometime in March to hope that you're going to book a whole bunch of tours for spring break. It's kind of a high competition time in terms of tours, because that's also a time where graduating seniors are kind of going to do their final swing of, where am I actually going to go? They're doing their admitted student visits as well. So sometimes there's not quite as much space for juniors. So if you're hoping to book onto those, plan that trip early. Don't wait until the last minute. Summer visits are great. Are they as great as school year visits? Not really, but it is definitely better than not being able to visit at all. So that is another good opportunity. And don't forget, we can visit some places in the fall. You're probably not going to visit everywhere on your list before you apply. That's okay, but really look to visit kind of a representative sample of schools. Now, how can we use SCOIR to and what is SCOIR, first of all? So for those of us who've been here, done this before, but more than 2 years ago, we used to use a program called Naviance. Naviance is gone. Put it out of your mind. It doesn't exist here at Hillsborough anymore. We've replaced it with SCOIR. So it is a college planning and application tool that students use, parents use, counselors use, teachers use to help students apply to 2- and 4-year schools. It's also a place you do searches. You can see past data about Hillsborough High School students who have been accepted. It's where you're going to kind of track the schools that you're looking at, the schools that you're applying to. Ultimately, it's how we're really going to complete that application process. You can now apply to some schools through SCOIR, but many times you'll also use an outside application to apply to many other schools. But it is how we send out all your materials to those schools. So students, there is no opting out of using SCOIR and just saying, well, I just use the Common App. Well, that's great. You can apply through there, but you have to use SCOIR and you have to keep us aware of what's going on with you. And we're going to get you back in there next week. So now, how many applications do students send out? As you saw earlier, that our class of 2022, it was just shy of 8 applications was kind of the average. When I computed that number, I pulled out the students who were just applying to RV and really looked at the kids who are applying to 4-year school to kind of compute that average. So this is kind of a breakdown of where those lists sort of wind up. Sometimes we do have some students in that 1 to 3 range. So in particular, recruited athletes typically land in that 1 range. Students who get into some schools early, sometimes they got a place that they know is an academic match. They get in early and they're just done. And that's fine. Nobody says you have to apply to a whole bunch of schools. If you got in, you love it, you can afford it, you can stop. That's okay. Most students land somewhere in the middle. We do have kind of an increasing numbers problem where, application numbers are climbing and climbing. And we do see that number kind of creeping up, that average number each year. I do try to encourage students to really kind of try real hard to land in that 10 to 12 range. I do, unless they've kind of got special circumstances in terms of applying to highly specific and selective programs. Otherwise, I do tend to find that students who are applying to kind of many reach schools often find that they get many denials and wait lists, and that can be very difficult for a student to manage. I also do anecdotally tend to find that students who have more reasonable list sizes tend to get into a higher percentage of the reach schools that they've applied to, likely because they're able to really dedicate some more real time and effort into the applications that they're doing. Because as we move into highly selective and reach schools, the amount of time per application spent is significant, as is the effort. And that is one of the things I hear from students. I rarely hear a student say, I wish I applied to more schools. Every year I hear students say, I wish I applied to fewer schools and didn't get kind of sucked down that rabbit hole of hearing where my peers were applying and thinking I needed to add just a few more schools. To give you an idea of kind of what's going on with some of those popular schools that I mentioned before, this is our stats from the class of 2022 in terms of kind of the average stats for students who are typically accepted there. So I want to kind of highlight a couple of things that'll come up, and I'll talk about them more later on. And one thing I want to say is kind of like, I love data. I show you lots of data. However, data isn't everything, because there's also often more information behind that data that just the stat doesn't always show. So for example, I'm going to talk about my friends at Penn State and Rutgers. These are two very popular schools from us. We send about 275 apps a year to Rutgers. We're landing around 100 to Penn State. And you're like, hey, look, it looks like Penn State is much more selective than Rutgers. And a lot of that has to do with the way those two schools allow students to apply and the way they admit. So when students apply to Penn State, they can pick the campus they want to start on. For most of our students, that is Happy Valley. They want to start at University Park. They want to end at University Park. That is the most competitive in the Penn State system. And then for Penn State, you can pick one major, one and only one major. So if you say, I want to apply to business or accounting or whatever at Penn State main campus, that's your only shot at Penn State main campus. If you are, and that is the most difficult way to get into Penn State main campus, business, University Park. And then if you are not admissible to Business University Park, then they look at you for business at whatever other starting campus you have wanted to see. So perhaps Harrisburg, and you're not able to be considered then for any other major at University Park. They just shunt you over to another campus. So basically what winds up happening is about half of our students get into start at the main campus, and probably about the other 48% winds up with the ability to start at another Penn State campus, which most of our students are not interested in because they find that they are able to get into other schools that are more representative of what they're looking for. Rutgers is a little bit different. Rutgers allows you to pick 3 schools within the Rutgers system when you are applying, and what order you put them in doesn't matter. They will equally consider you for all 3 of them. So a student could apply to engineering and arts and sciences and School of Environmental and Biological Sciences in New Brunswick. And they could get 3 separate decisions, but as long as they're admitted to one of them, they're considered admitted, which is why you see kind of a higher acceptance percentage there. So it's kind of a little bit about how the stats aren't always what you see. What you see here at TCNJ is I've got kind of double asterisks there, because last year I found that TCNJ was doing a good amount of admitting through a conditional admission program where students started as a non-matriculated student, weren't eligible for financial aid, et cetera. So yeah, they were admitted, but there's kind of a really big caveat on that admit. They were also restricted and they couldn't be a full-time student, et cetera. So admitted, but maybe not quite what they were looking for either. So this kind of gives you an idea about what's going on with some other schools in terms of their acceptance percentage for Hillsborough students, maybe versus kind of the greater public, where we're typically seeing that mid 50% of SATs falling for those schools, and the average weighted GPA of admitted Hillsborough students. And I will kind of come back to that weighted GPA thing in a minute. When we talk about the college list, we tend to look at, everybody's got different terminology. We try to be consistent here with using probable, which is, for some people, they like to call that safety. We call them probable. Those are schools where students fall above the average stats for admission. Those schools generally have higher overall admit percentages, lots of people that look like you. For students, these are places where you potentially could be in an honors program. You want to look for scholarships, places you'd be really, really happy, because for every student, there's probables. And for every student, there's lots of probables. And so you want to look for places that, when you're putting probables on your list, they want to be places you would enjoy and where there would be some perks that would make you actually consider attending that school. Perhaps they've got something special for special opportunities for your major, et cetera. Many of your schools, kind of the bulk of them, typically for most students will fall in that match target range. They're kind of in the middle. You're kind of fall within the average stats for admission. Not everybody like you gets in, but many of, decent percentage of them do. The average stats look like your stats, including the rigor of the program. So in terms of the course levels that you're taking, I like to look, and when we start looking at overall acceptance rates, I really kind of consider any place that has an acceptance overall admission rate of 20% or less, they're really a reach for everybody. I try not to classify them so much in the target range because the decisions are so unpredictable. So I kind of scooch a lot of those to reach. Reaches are places where you fall below the average stats, or they're just competitive places. They're those places that accept 20% or less of overall students. They're reaches for everybody. I don't care where you are in the class. Those places are reaches for you. And really, I think of everything here as, yes, I've got kind of 3 buckets, but I feel like everything, there's a continuum. And when you meet with me and I'm kind of helping you come up with schools and figure out where they are, I'll tell you like, okay, well, this one's definitely a reach. That's a farther reach. This one's a little bit closer, maybe a little more of a high target. So think of it a little bit more of as a continuum. And you'll find that as you start to look at schools, you get an idea about where they fall. And then we help students to kind of get a better idea of that as time goes on. So what are some key data to look at to kind of figure out where you are? The student's GPA that is on their high school transcript. So if you go into Genesis, you'll see your high school transcript. I'll show it in a bit. It's towards the bottom right. Weighted GPA is there, unweighted GPA is there. We're looking at the cumulative number. So that'll be the number at the end of the junior year, but for now we've got end of sophomore year numbers, a student's current test scores, the rigor of the courses that they're taking. When you're looking at stats for colleges, it's really, really important that you try to look for schools and data that are from the last 2 years. So for the entering class of for fall schools, kids that entered in fall of 2021 and kids that entered in fall of 2022. And why do I say that? Because that's after the COVID switch of moving into the land of test optional. Because what we really found is that the number of applicants have gone up a ton in the last 2 years. The acceptance percentages have basically declined. Average test score ranges have typically gone up about 100 points since pre-COVID. So when we're just kind of like Googling like average test score range of Rutgers, and we land on the niche site, which is usually, I feel like, the top site that comes up. And when you go on there, you don't necessarily know what class year you're looking at that data for. And you're like, oh, I'm right in there. And then I shove you over to the Rutgers site. I was like, hey, no, you're not, because things have changed a lot since, in the 3 years since Niche updated their data. So you want to make sure you're really looking at data where possible on the individual school's website, because that's where you're going to get the most accurate stuff as well. And then we'll show you scattergrams as well that are located on the SCOIR site. Those can be helpful, but again, I recommend students really restrict that data to the last 2 years to make sure they're looking at the most recent information. If you want more info about creating a balanced list, I do have a video on the class of 2024 application guide, so you can check that out there. And we're going to go and we'll do a brief section here on the 2-year schools, and then we'll move into 4-year schools. So when we're talking about 2-year schools, we're for the most part talking about community colleges. Mentioned 20 to 25% of our class starts at community college. Most do start at RVCC, but that's not where students have to start. There are community colleges all over the country. We have students that will, attend Middlesex or Mercer, perhaps because they've got a program that RVCC doesn't. One good thing, little tidbit, is to know that if that campus offers a program that RVCC doesn't, you can pay the in-county rate to go to another county college. So that's a good little tidbit to follow away. We do have students who will look at schools 2-year schools that are out of state, perhaps some that include housing. So those schools do exist as well. An increasingly common option is something like Rowan Choice, which is Gloucester County College, which is now Rowan College of South Jersey, is affiliated with Rowan University. Students basically live on campus at regular Rowan for 4 years, but take their classes at Rowan College of South Jersey / Gloucester Community College for the first year. So it allows for students who may not have been admissible to Rowan to start at the community college level academically while still enjoying a 4-year college experience. We do typically have 2 to 3 students a year who are taking advantage of that. It is also, quite frankly, a huge cost savings, because community college is a heck of a lot cheaper than starting at 4-year school, even if you're doing just a year or 2. When we look at community colleges, they do have athletics, clubs, EOF, disability services, all of those other things that 4-year schools have. So it doesn't have to be just a place that you take a class and come home, unless that's what you're looking for. Why do students choose it? Well, cost is a big one, right? I said it's a heck of a lot cheaper. You're saving like 20 grand in tuition alone. For students who are in the top 15% of their graduating class at the end of their junior year or the end of the senior year, those students can attend RVCC for free for their first 2 years. There is kind of an extension program that goes on for years 3 and 4 as well. Just to give you an idea about who that is, this number is fairly representative. So for the class of 2023, that top 15% cutoff was a weighted GPA of about 100.3. That's pretty representative. Sometimes it's a little bit higher, sometimes it's a little bit lower, but that's probably what we're looking at. And students who are qualified are notified in the beginning of their senior year. Some of our students really enjoy the honors college at RVCC if they're looking for an additional challenge. Some students have family circumstances that make it a better idea for them to stay at home for a year or two. Some students are just not ready, and that is absolutely okay. Starting a community college is a great way to kind of test the waters academically, figure out what you want to major in. Maybe you're somebody who's not a great transitioner, and that's a good way to kind of ease your way into the pool. Perhaps you're a student who has some academic regrets about the last couple of years. A lot of times those students will apply to 4-year schools, see what your options are, but sometimes students aren't happy with what their options are. It's a good reason to go ahead, start at that 2-year school, kind of restart the clock. Once you have attended a 2-year school and you have a full year under your belt, at that point, more of the focus, or most of the focus, sometimes all of the focus, is really shifting when you transfer to look at your success at that college level. Because what's the best predictor of how you're going to do in college? Well, it's how you're doing in college, right? So that's where that focus is going to be. So that's a great way to kind of wipe your slate clean and start over. In terms of what do schools offer, they offer different kinds of associate's degrees. Students can see in advance on the NJ transfer site exactly what will transfer to 4-year schools. I think one of the big fears out there is always, I'm going to take a whole bunch of stuff that isn't going to count. And so, yes, you can absolutely do that if you do not do your homework. So you do not have an assigned school counselor in college that makes sure that, that at community college, to make sure that you're taking all the right things, to transfer to a particular school. You need to kind of be responsible for some of those things on your own and advocate for yourself throughout your experience to make sure you're making appointments and checking on things. Our community colleges in New Jersey also offer more hands-on programs, applied science programs that are designed for students who are going to go straight to work and are not at this point planning on pursuing something that requires a 4-year college degree. There's also shorter-term certificate programs. One very popular option as well is to start and go get their RN, so get that associates with nursing. Get the RN and then go back later to do an RN to BSN degree that allows a student to start working as a nurse much sooner, and then go back and get that more advanced degree later on. The admission process for community college is much more straightforward. There is no minimum GPA. There's an application. Students don't generally do that. We haven't done it yet with our seniors. We encourage them to do it at our group session, which we hold in February. They see a transcript at the end after graduation. Testing is not required, but the student, if they have it, can use it in lieu of placement testing. Otherwise, they may have to take a placement test. Also, the Honors College at RVCC, which we do have probably 3 to 5 students enroll in a year, is more competitive. They're looking for at least 2 of those criteria. They're kind of down below there. There is a little bit of flexibility, especially amongst that top 20%, because Hillsborough tends to be so high. Usually I'll look for students who are really kind of in that 90s range in terms of unweighted GPA. Typically, students have taken some smattering of honors or AP courses throughout their 4 years, perhaps not in everything, but maybe in some academic areas. Those tend to be good honors college candidates for students. So we do have students who apply and attend that program every year, go on to a variety of schools. Now, shifting back onto the 4-year front. What matters in terms of things? How does everything work? So first thing we've got out there is we've got the application. So that is how a student expresses an interest in going to the school, right? We're going to apply there. So that most important thing is to remember that application is done by the student. It's not something that the parent should be doing. Students should be doing it. The common application, and you'll hear us mention it a lot, that's the most popular one. Nearly all of our 4-year candidates do it. You can start it at any time. You just want to make sure if you're creating any accounts that have to do anything with college and you're filling out any interest things on any websites, Don't use your Hillsborough High School email address. You always want to use a personal email address. I recommend perhaps using one that's dedicated for college, definitely one that has a not inappropriate email address, but be consistent about which one you're using so that you're not kind of like creating multiple records at colleges. So make sure all your college stuff uses the same email address. Students can start that Common App at any time. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to do optional groups later in the school year where we will begin those so students can get started on them before we leave for the summer. An alternative application that's out there is the Coalition application, also known as the SCOIR application. So when you log into SCOIR, you'll see some things about like applying with SCOIR. That's what that is. There are some schools that accept that application. We're kind of in a period of flux because there used to be another application called the Coalition application, which was on a standalone site. It just kind of got purchased, merged, acquired by SCOIR this year. So this is the first year of the SCOIR application. There may be some more schools that didn't take part this year that do take part next year once it moves into year 2, but I think everybody's squirrely about being an early adopter, sometimes myself included. So some of the schools that you'll see when you see what kinds of applications do they accept, realize that that may change between now and next year. Along those lines, there's also school-specific applications. Perfect example of one that will change for next year, Rutgers. Last year, my friends at Rutgers accepted the old Coalition application or their own application. This year, they were not ready to move to SCOIR, were unable to do that, so they just took their own application. Next year, I can already tell you that they are going onto the Common application, which is super, super exciting for every single person in our office and will be, believe me, students for you because their application is slow. And so many students would be thrilled to use the Common App for Rutgers. So things will change. There'll be some more schools that move on to the Common next year, more schools that move on to the Coalition as well. So don't get too married into what application you'll be doing for which school right now. What's the most important factor, though, when schools are making decisions? It is truly the academics around the student. So when we talk about academics, we're talking not just about GPA, but in a more holistic sense, who is that student academically? What courses have they taken throughout their 4 years overall within a given subject compared to what is available at that high school, because they do know what is available to students at our school. How have they performed in those classes? What are their grade trends across the years? Are there grade trends overall? Are there grade trends within a specific subject area? Perhaps the student's just never really a great math student. And depending upon where the student's applying and what major they're applying to, that might matter more or less. More selective schools, they like you to see you be generally good in all of the things. The vast majority of the schools understand that different people have different strengths and weaknesses, right? And so for a student who maybe hasn't been a fantastic math student all along, but is stronger in other subjects, maybe they're applying to a communications major, that is fine and dandy at many schools. So they're looking at that degree of detail though. They're looking, as I said, at what's you've taken versus what's available. So how many courses have you taken? How difficult are they? Are they related to your intended major? What have you taken that the school offers that is related to your intended major? And if you haven't, have you kind of addressed why that might be within your application? And there are opportunities to do that. Have you met the minimum that is required by the school? And what about compared to what's recommended? And also I do want to kind of note, so we don't have to come back to it again, we don't release rank for admission. So just going to leave that out there. Kind of moving on, senior year schedule. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this because I feel like it's something that students have regrets about sometimes. And I've had several students this year who have had regrets about their senior year course selections. And now's the time to talk about it because we haven't chosen them yet. Be really, really careful in what you choose to take in senior year. So you want to take, in general, we recommend students to take a full academic course load. The more selective the schools you're applying to, the more academic classes we should be seeing there. Everybody's going to have English. Everybody's going to have PE. I strongly recommend that everybody take math courses. Beyond that, students, it kind of depends on where you're applying. The more selective schools really like to see you continue in all 5 academic areas through your senior year. Other schools, that's not as important, but they really would like to see you continue, especially in your academic areas of interest. So look what is out there in the course, in the subject area that you want to be in, and take advantage of some of those electives. Because next year, for many of you, is kind of the first opportunity that you're going to have to be able to actually like choose classes. Like the first time we're not kind of like forcing 6 out of your 7 periods on you. So take advantage of that and look to take what you can. You want to have an intentional selection, something that makes sense. And if the answer is, I don't know what I want to do, what makes sense is for you to try some different things and try it now where it's free. I mean, I guess you're paying taxes on it, so it's not exactly free, but it's free and you're not paying like $40,000 a year to try some of these electives. So it's a great time to try taking a business class, try taking a psych class, try taking something that's in communications, some of those more popular college majors, and kind of see where you might land. That's something that we can certainly talk about in students' letters of recommendation. And when I was a regular counselor, it's something that I did used to say, like, hey, Johnny doesn't know what he wants to do, so he's taking the opportunity in senior year to try out a lot of different things and see where his interests really lie, because then that is an intentional schedule. You want to look for something that is balanced and maintainable. So course rigor, yes, important, but don't go loading up that schedule with a whole bunch of classes in which you can't maintain for 10 months. And where you're really going to struggle, because what you're looking for is, yes, you want to challenge yourself, but you need to make it until June. No one's goal is to like flame out in senior year in high school. You want to be able to be successful in courses that you are in. Ideally, you want to stay in the courses that you say that you're going to take in September, because when you apply to schools in September, they're going to see what classes you're enrolled in. And when you change those classes during the year, you have to notify them. If it's after you have been accepted, they have the ability to say, like, sorry, you're no longer accepted. So just putting them on your schedule up front is not what it's all about. It's about staying in those courses and being successful and having grades that are similar to those that you've had throughout your other 3 years of study during your senior year. Also a reminder, our master schedule that we're building, the staffing, everything is based upon the selections that are made in March. We were all here last summer. I know what it looks like. I know people were unhappy with things. We look to continue to make positive changes, but don't assume changes are going to be possible throughout the summer. So sometimes what causes a lot of changes and a lot of difficulties are when people are kind of trying to make a lot of changes about what classes they chose because they didn't put a lot of intention into it the first time. Don't assume that that is going to be possible this year. So make sure that when you make those initial choices, that they are really what you want to do. And we're talking now, and it's January 5th. You have 2 months to do homework about what you want to take next year. So you want to use that time wisely. For those that have not seen your transcript, surprise, this is what the new transcripts look like. If you haven't looked at it this year, it got kind of like a facelift. One frequent problem is that people tend to look at the wrong spot for the GPA. You want to head way down here towards the bottom right. You see this section that's circled, that is your cumulative GPA. Right now for you all, that shows that's the GPA of your freshman and your sophomore year combined. At the end of this year, it'll update, it'll include junior year. When you apply to schools next year, this is what it's going to be looking like. It's got a list of your senior year grades. The GPA that's here is the GPA through the end of your junior year. And this is what it looks like. When we get to middle of your senior year next year, and we get to February, this gets updated with your mid-year grades at that point. And there's an update of your cumulative GPA. It moves very little. So folks, the GPAs that you have by the end of this year is really what you're going to be applying with to schools. So this is the time to really kind of get it in gear. You got another month of second marking period, then you've got all of third, all of fourth. You really want to be looking to maintain and increase your grades if possible through the end of this year. I know I got a couple emails actually ahead of time about weighted GPA. I just kind of want to mention what that is, because you will see, one, we don't use 4.0 GPAs, scale GPAs here. This is what goes to schools. They know this is what to expect. The reality is they're recalculating your GPA anyway. They're not using the GPAs that are on our transcript. So how are these calculated? The unweighted GPA is just a straight average of the actual grades that show on your transcript. The weighted GPAs include additional weighting. So anything here that has nothing after it, like marketing and digital photography, that goes in exactly as it is, 85 with worth 2.5 credits. Something that is English CP goes in, it's times by 1.05, I think. Honors is a little bit higher. That is 1.1, I think. AP and concurrent is 1.15. So those are what the multipliers are that go into your weighted GPA. And so you're going to see that for a student who's taken, the more honors and AP courses that a student has taken, typically the greater differential between their unweighted GPA and their weighted GPA. To give you kind of perspective about where things fall in the Hillsborough High School classes, typically the juniors, end of year junior GPA that is kind of first in the class, typically the highest GPA is kind of in that 107, 108 range. Typically the top 10% has weighted GPAs kind of in that 103-ish range and up, sometimes 102-ish range and up. The middle of the class tends to fall somewhere around 94, 95 in terms of weighted GPA. So that kind of gives you an idea about where things are. So now shifting gears, let's talk about testing. So kind of want to give you the lay of the land. I told you before, many schools now don't require testing. So let me give you the terminology. Test required is you got to send test scores or your application's not being reviewed. Strongly recommended is you got to send test scores because they really don't want to admit you without test scores. Test optional is we'll read them if we got them. If we don't got them, we're not looking for them and we're not going to ask you for them and it doesn't count against you. Test flexible is other code word for strongly recommended, which means we'll consider other types, but we really care about test scores. So you need to send us something. Test blind is we're not looking at them and you can't even send them to us. Or if you do, we're not looking at them. They don't even show to us when we're reviewing. Schools policies can differ within a university. So for instance, at Cornell, some of the schools are test blind, some of them are test optional. So you do have to pay attention within the university. There are just a few that are like that. And also definitely for special programs, especially for BSMD. So if anybody's looking for an accelerated program, BSMD or other types of accelerated programs, combined degree programs, those may have policies that require testing as well. Be sure that you're using the school website as your source because these change. Every day I am getting more announcements about kind of your class, the entering, the high school graduating class of 2024, but there are lots of schools that have no idea what they're doing yet and won't make those announcements until sometime later in the spring. So thereby what we recommend is we recommend everybody test at least once in their junior year because that is going to give you options. One, that's going to let you know where you stand. You can determine based on that, is test prep, if I do one, am I happy with what I got? Two, if I'm not, do I want to do test prep? If I did test prep, is it likely to improve my scores enough for them to be helpful? Especially if I'm paying for that test prep, right? Because so test prep that you do on your own that you're not paying for, well, that's fine, that's great. But I don't want students paying. Sometimes I hear students say like, oh, I paid, $5,000 for test prep and I wound up applying to all my school's test optional anyway. So that's not a great use of money. And there's definitely somewhere else you could have allocated that. So we want to make good decisions about when we're going to do that. Also, if you do have scores, you're keeping all your options open. Remember, I said not everybody knows what they're doing yet. There are some schools that are definitely test required. Every public school in the state of Florida, Georgia Tech, Purdue, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, MIT, Georgetown. I think that's all I got right now. Some schools do have scholarships that require test scores as well. So you're kind of keeping options open then, just in case those schools make an appearance on your list later. And as I said earlier, strong scores, so those above the school's average, those are always going to help a student. There are some exceptions though, where for some students, sometimes schools the scores that are lower might still help a student and I'll have them submit them. And we'll talk more to students as we move later into this year and into next year about making that decision about applying to schools with scores or without scores. In terms of what tests are out there, there's the SAT. We're still at 2 sections right now. It's currently paper, though some students will get an invitation to do the digital pilot. I believe we're still at a place now where those scores can be used for schools, but I think that the score release is still like super delayed. Like it takes a really long time to get them back. So keep that in mind if you're looking at any like digital pilot exams that are over this summer and in early next fall. You got to look at when you're going to get those scores back to determine if that's a good plan for you. The ACT, alternative to the SAT, we don't offer it at Hillsborough. It's on a scale of 36. There's a rough equivalency between two. You can just Google like ACT equivalent to a 1200 and it'll tell you what that is. Some students do better on one versus the other. I do encourage students to, kind of try both out, do some sample questions, see what works best. In general, I would say ACT questions are more straightforward, but there are more of them in a section. So you kind of have to work faster. So if you're kind of slow to process things, that's probably not a great fit for you. But if you're kind of a faster reader, you appreciate that straightforward nature, ACT may be your friend. And colleges do look at those exams equally. As I mentioned earlier, I really do find that kind of the academic record of a student is a better indicator about where they're going to wind up and where they'll be accepted. I said before, if you take it, you're keeping your options open. You'll be able to decide for each school, am I going to apply with scores or without scores? So test optional or with scores. And everybody kind of words that a little bit differently. For schools that you are deciding, I'm going to send my scores, for the most part, you'll be able to choose which scores you're going to send. The exception there is Georgetown. They've got a lot of funny little requirements, one of which is if you test, they want your scores. And not only do they want your scores, they want all the scores for every single test that you ever taken. Nobody else is really like that, but they are. Other than that, you're going to be able to choose for a given school. Do I send all of the test dates that I've taken, or do I send only some of them? When you send them, so the whole date goes. So you could choose to send like your March scores if you did, let's say you did better on the evidence-based reading and writing in March and better on the math in May, and then your June scores were just lower overall. You could choose to send only March and May. Many schools will do something called super score, which means that they will internally take the best evidence-based reading, the best math, and they'll combine them, and that's what they're going to display to their readers as they're reading their applications. There are some schools, though, that will only look at the best single test date. So some notables are right there: Penn State, UT Austin, Ohio State. They look at the highest single test date. So the date that you had the highest score, you can't kind of like mix and match between the different ones. So it's just so you kind of know what those options are going forwards. And again, that's something we work more with students on as we move into the application process later, but we do want to encourage you to try testing. Don't wait till next year to take your first test. You want to do that this year so you can move forward with the best information. It'll also help you to build your college list if you kind of know where you stand. Also, I just kind of want to mention for a brief bit, AP exams. AP exam scores are something that are considered by some schools in the admission process, not by all schools. Scores are self-reported on the application. So within the admission process, if a school considers them, they'll consider that in their admission process. If they don't ask for them, they don't consider them. So for instance, Rutgers does not consider your AP scores at all in the admission process. Many other large public schools in particular do not consider AP scores in the admission process. One thing that's kind of important to note about that is for students who are self-studying, particularly in the area of computer science. We definitely recommend that they take that course in school, that AP Computer Science A course. Schools are definitely very clear that it is their absolute preference that if a course is offered by a school, they would prefer to see the student take that course within the school setting. Rather than to just self-study for an exam, unless it wasn't possible for them to take the course for some reason. And if it's not, you have to find a way on the application to explain that, because a school won't have any idea that you just took an AP computer science class if you're applying to a comp sci major at, say, Purdue. So those AP exams are affiliated with AP courses. We've already had registration for them this year. Yes, you're correct. And obviously they're not going to see scores that for exams that you take in your senior year when you apply to school. So they're going to see stuff through the end of this year if you choose to include it on your application. And some students find that they didn't do as well as they hoped on their exams, and they choose to not include that information on their application, and that's okay. You're not required to disclose those scores. I do have some slides on here. I'll have a link to this presentation in the email that I sent out. So I'm going to skip kind of through those test prep options. I kind of gave you a little bit of an idea about, some things to think about before you engage in test prep, but no, there are lots of options out there at many different price points. Shifting gears to the other portions of the application that are less academic in nature, right? We've got the essay. I mentioned students will be writing that in school. First thing I want to say is it's not your mother or father's application essay. And I mean that in two ways. One, things have changed so much from like the days that I applied to college and I wrote an essay, and it was more like a personal statement, like who I am, what I've done, and why I want to go to Hofstra. And that was kind of what the essay was. And or like what I want to be when I grow up. And that was kind of what the essay was. And that's really not what the college essay is about anymore. The main essay is really more about who the student is, what they're passionate about, what's important to them, what they value in their life, and kind of using those things to tell a story about them. And I would say that many of them are more creative, not all of them. So there are lots of different essay styles that are out there. So if you're not a super creative writer, don't panic. You don't have to write something that is like super abstract. We do write those essays like a first draft that in school. So it is part of the curriculum in most of the English classes. They tend to do it during fourth quarter. Most students will work with a common application prompt. What we hope for students, I would say very, very few students come out of there with an end product. Honestly, I'm pretty suspect when a student's like, oh yeah, I finished my essay in the end of English class last year and I haven't picked it back up. I'm like, oh no, because a lot changes between like June and October. And often that thing that you wrote in fourth marking period really needs some sprucing up by the time we get back to the beginning of next year. So it shouldn't be your end product, but hopefully it is a good work in progress, either towards your final product or in that you wrote this thing, through it, realized that like, I didn't know what I was doing, but now I know, and I just had to get it done, but now I really have a lot more direction. So then it served its purpose as well. And that's okay. I do really encourage students to spend some of their summer working on essays. That was honestly the most popular feedback I got from our seniors this year when I said like, what do you wish you did differently? It was really like, I wish I worked on my essays over the summer, because it really made me stress out in senior year when I was doing that and my applications and my senior year courses and maybe a fall sport or marching band. Like I wish I took something off my plate by spending more time and picking it up over the summer. And I don't mean that students need to do that on like June 21st, like put it down for a while, but pick it back up sometime in July or August and try to get yourself close to a final product by the end of the summer. And then I said, that not your mother or father's thing was kind of a double meaning. And the double meaning is that I really mean that it needs to mean the student's work. It is very, very apparent when essays have not been written by students and they've been written by well-meaning adults in their life, often because it is kind of off the mark on what a school is really looking for. It doesn't sound like the student's voice. It's inconsistent with their writing in courses. It is inconsistent with their grades and other writing efforts. So those things become pretty clear. It is definitely really, really important that this is something that a student is doing in their own voice. So students are going to work on that. There's a fantastic resource out there that I refer to a lot, that our English teachers will refer to a ton as well. It's called the College Essay Guy. You can Google him. He has paid services, but he has like more free services than like free resources out there than anybody. And so you'll find that throughout this process, I link to his stuff a ton because it's great. And he has some really, really good resources for students and helping them to get started on their essays and helping them to do that brainstorming portion of the process. What else? You might hear some of your senior friends saying like, oh my God, I wrote like 20 college essays. And that's because some schools, not all schools, some schools, in addition to that main essay, are going to ask for other essays as well. They're commonly called the supplemental essays. Those are very intentional. They are topics that are picked by that specific school. That being said, there are some that are most common. So like, why this major, why this school, most important extracurriculars. So there are some common ones. So sometimes we recommend students applying to a lot of supplement heavy schools, start working on a shell of those essays over the summer as well, so that you at least have some ideas. But that's where it's really about an emphasis on fit. And I find supplemental is really where a strong applicant can make or break their chances at some of those reach schools. Because if they sound like the marketing materials that are coming out of the university, that's not what we're going for. We're going for more authentic reflections of why a student feels they are a great fit at that institution, or why they've chosen to apply there, and why they're looking at that major, and what they want to study, what kinds of clubs they want to do, what their academic areas of interest are, et cetera, is drilled down very deep. That is what schools are looking for on those essays. Some other schools have different essays. The University of California schools they do personal insight questions, so those are kind of different as well. And there are a lot of great resources out there. These supplements, these are not something to start on now. Not something I would recommend working on during English at the end of the year. Really focus that on that, pick a common app topic and work on that during the year, because these supplements, they change from year to year. You don't want to waste your time writing something that's not going to exist. Again, in the summer, you can start on kind of a basic shell for some of them, but the actual supplemental topics won't be available until August. So don't spend your time before then writing about something like NYU's changed this year. If you had written why NYU, you would have wasted your time, because they changed their essay to a topic about diversity this year and made it optional. So you don't want to spend your time doing it. We've also got letters of recommendation. So first thing, not everybody wants them. Not everybody will read them. We can't even send them everywhere. Rutgers doesn't want them. Penn State doesn't want them. Pitt doesn't want them. Many other large publics don't want them. Others don't require them, but you can send them. So for instance, like Montclair, they require a counselor letter. They don't require any teacher letters. You can send them some, or you cannot. And that's kind of up to you. Schools will set their own limits on how many they will accept and what they require. So it's not a universal answer. Counselor letter, first concern. A lot of the faces that you saw today are new, right? In terms of school counselors. So some of you may not have met your school counselor yet. I definitely encourage you to do that sometime this spring, hopefully more than in just your scheduling meeting. So especially if you have a newer counselor, I'd encourage you to think about making, when you're ready, an individual appointment to talk with your counselor, so you can get to know them a little bit better and they can get to know you a little bit better. We will ask you to do some things later this year and in the summer to supply them with some information to make sure that they are giving the information they need to be giving in your school counselor letter of recommendation. We'll have kind of an online survey that we call the brag sheet that students will do. We'll have an online survey parents will do called the parent point of view. We'll open that stuff up later. The reason we don't open up now is because once it's done, it's submitted. And again, a lot changes between now and the end of the summer. So that's really a great activity for you to do, later on at the end of the school year and throughout the summer. What you are going to find out about next week, and counselors will go over it, is that students will also be giving 2 different teachers a link and an opportunity to provide some feedback that counselor can use in their letter. So those are 2 teachers that are not going to be writing teacher letters of recommendation for the student, but there are 2 other teachers that the student has some kind of relationship with. And so who might a student give those to? Maybe a teacher that they had in 9th or 10th grade. They could still give some good feedback, but probably aren't a great source for a whole letter. Perhaps a coach, a mentor, an advisor for a club. Those are all good people to give the teacher to counselor feedback form links to. So parents, I'm mentioning it so you kind of know that this exists. Students, you're going to get a lot more talk about this in the group presentations that we're doing next week. We're also going to ask students to give an activity resume to their counselors and other types of info. So we ask students to be done with this stuff by the beginning of senior year. I can absolutely tell you, and I'm sure there are nodding heads behind the black boxes there, that this is the #1 thing that holds up the college application process and us sending things out. Just today, there was a student who added a last-minute school to their list at the deadline of today. And while we could send most things out, they never did their brag sheet. So you know what's not written? Their counselor letter of recommendation. You know what couldn't be done today? Their counselor letter of recommendation. So this is the problem we kind of get into, is that students have dragged their feet on some of these other things, and then we can't kind of move forward. For students, if that student had put their stuff on their list and they had done their brag sheet back in the summer, even if they never looked at it again, that's fine. Then they added this school to their list today. We would have sent their stuff 3 weeks ago and it wouldn't have been a big deal. Everything would have gone out and they could have taken it to the last day to submit that application, add things at the last minute. We don't care if it's already done. But when things are not done, that's when there's a lot of unnecessary stress that happens for a student. Now, teacher letters of recommendation. Some schools require teacher letters of recommendation. So I've never seen a school for regular admission that requires more than 2. So we really do ask students to ask for no more than 2 letters of recommendation. We really want them to focus on, for the most part, academic subject area teachers, for the most part, especially if they're applying to more selective schools. There's an exception, of course, if you're applying to music or art or film programs where you might need something non-academic for those students, but the more selective the school, the more likely they're going to want to see academic letters. Really, junior year teachers are great teachers to focus on, or people that maybe they're going to have as a second-time teacher in their senior year. So somebody, maybe they took World History Honors as a freshman and they had Wilson and they're planning to take AP Euro next year, so they're going to have Wilson again. Like he'd be a good possibility. We don't want students to ask them yet, so don't go asking any teachers tomorrow for letters of recommendation. They are not ready to talk to you yet. We want you to spend some time though over the next couple of months thinking about who you want to ask, and honestly, above all, work on nurturing those relationships. You're looking for not necessarily the place where you got the highest grade, but I would say the place where you probably make the biggest impact in the classroom, and where that person is going to have something to say about you in that letter of recommendation. There are a couple of exceptions for students who might need to ask more than 2, in particular, students applying to accelerated medical programs. As you're looking at those programs, you want to see what is required. And also students who are applying to MIT, because they have specific requirements, as does Georgetown, in terms of the subject area that those teachers must come from. So some of those folks might need a 3rd letter, but otherwise, please do not ask 4 and 5 teachers for letters of recommendation. We won't be able to send them. We won't be able to use them. And then those people are spending, an hour or more of their time writing a letter of recommendation for you that is not going to get used. We have a lot of students. We don't necessarily have as many staff as we would like to, especially writing letters of recommendation. So we don't want people writing things that aren't going to get used. So think carefully before you ask people. What other factors go into admission? So schools are looking at your extracurricular participation. And when we talk about extracurriculars, we're really talking about anything that you do outside the hours of 7:30 to 2:30. So that might be athletics, work, clubs, volunteering, might be music, might be babysitting, caregiver for an older family member, helping in a family business. All of those things count. Something you can do now, you can start writing that stuff down. Google Docs is a great place to get started, because I'm not even sure what I had for lunch yesterday. I definitely don't know what I did 3 years ago. And you probably don't either. So start writing it down. It'll make next year easier. I do find students often undersell themselves there. So it is something that we work on, about kind of prettying up those, activity lists as we move on. Students, I encourage you to kind of look and continue on building upon those activities through your senior year as well. You don't have to stay in something if you don't love it anymore, but try something else out. And see what you can find that is out there that's a good fit for you. And there's no magic formula for which categories those things need to be in. I do also encourage you to use this summer wisely as well. Relaxation, rest is important. Starting your apps, yes, that's important. But you should also look to see what else it is that you can do that's this summer, whether it's work, volunteering, if you're looking to do a summer program, et cetera, so that you can include that information on your application too. Some students might have audition or portfolio components to their application. So that's going to be something that's out there as well. That's much more of an individualized basis by student and by school. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about that. I mentioned demonstrated interest. These are some of the different ways that schools will consider that. And then finally, a whole bunch of stuff that you have absolutely no ability to change or impact. And those are called institutional priorities. So every school has something that they're looking for. They know what they're looking to do to build their class. They know what their number is that they need to hit. And they know what the composition of that, what they want that to be. And so different schools have different goals. Some schools might have started a new major. So for instance, this year, Pitt started a new public health major. So they are looking to build that program up a little bit because it's brand new. So that would have been a great way to apply to perhaps get into Pitt this year. So they might be looking for certain majors that are maybe new or maybe under enrolled. And so it might be a little bit easier to get into a school that it has programs like that. That being said, they're for the most part not going to advertise what they are. So that's something to think about. Schools are in general, looking for an increase in first generation students and other underrepresented student groups. Some schools look at legacy. Some schools don't look at legacy. Rutgers does not care. If you're a brother, sister, aunt, uncle, grandmother went to Rutgers, they probably will care if their name is on a building. But beyond that, I think we can all look left, look right, and find somebody that went to Rutgers. So that's not an important part. That's not a part at all in their admission process. University of Pennsylvania, they consider it only for students who apply early decision. There's other schools that always consider it. Usually when we talk about what are the factors that are considered at a school, there's kind of like very important, kind of important, considered, not considered. Typically legacy, sibling status usually kind of falls in that considered range. Other things that fall in that range might be, geography. Like I said, major. Someone being a recruited athlete absolutely affects their admission. It could affect, they're a bassoon player and they need a bassoon player at that school. That could affect their admission. There's lots of things out there that you can't really do anything about, and you don't really know what they're looking for. But it is the thing that really explains why some kids get in and some kids don't. When you're looking and you're like, hey, I know that kid looks just like me academically, or hey, I think I'm stronger than them academically. That's because you don't know what else a school is looking for. And it doesn't have anything to do with you. You'd probably be a great fit there too. But the fact is schools don't have an unlimited number of seats. So that's kind of what explains some things. The other thing that I'm just going to touch on briefly is how a student applies early decision versus early action. So people have heard about early decision, that is binding. So if a student applies to a school early decision, they are going there. It's game over. So those decisions have come back. So we do have some of our students who are done with their admission process. Early action, most of our students will apply to some schools early action. That's usually kind of in that November 1st-ish to December 1st-ish time range. And students hear early, find out early if they're getting in, but they do not have to go there. So we do encourage a lot of students to apply that way. Here's just kind of a quick view of what the overall process looks like, what timeframes are. The things that are red here, those are things that I'm giving you the green light on working on those things now. Now, financial aid. How much does this whole kit and caboodle cost? First up, application fees. They're not cheap. Your kid is probably going to get some emails and some offers from some schools to apply for free because some schools are, definitely looking to increase their application numbers. So sometimes I'll talk to kids and be like, hey, why did you apply there? Like, it doesn't fit amongst your other schools. Like, it doesn't look like them. They're like, oh, it was free. So I applied. So, yeah, you can do that. But otherwise, for the most part, college application fees are going to vary from, I'd say, from about $50 to $80 a piece. So remember we saw that we have a bunch of kids applying to 20 or more schools every year. They're spending a lot of money on application fees. So that's a good reason to have a smaller list. Then there are additional fees if you're applying to things like accelerated med programs. For one of the financial aid applications, the CSS profile that I'll talk about in a second, that has a fee as well. So that also kind of adds up. So it can be expensive just to even kind of apply to college for most students unless you qualify for a need-based, income-based fee waiver. Then we've kind of got the cost of attending school. So how much does stuff cost? Here at the top, I've got tuition and required fees. So this is just the school part of things. and kind of what those costs are. Then we've got the living side of things. That's room and board. That varies a lot. The numbers that are on the lower end, those I would say are schools that are in more rural areas. The bigger the city, the more northern or California the city, the more expensive the housing is. So you'll see, you know, housing is a lot more expensive in New York City than it is in, you know, Lawrence, Kansas, for instance. So you're going to see some variation there. When we talk about cost of attendance, it is a sum of the tuition, the fees, the room and the board, commuting costs, if that's what a student's doing, books, other transportation costs, etc. So direct expenses, which are things you're paying straight to the school, so tuition, fees, room and board, and indirect expenses, books, transportation, etc. So here's an example we're just going to talk about direct costs for now, because everybody kind of figures their own things into total cost of attendance. And that I've said, you know, kind of allocate 5 to 7 for that. This is what direct costs are looking at like this year. So RV, like $7,000, but you're living at home. Rutgers, if you're living at home, $16,300. Rutgers, if you're living on campus, $30,600. TCNJ, Rowan, they're all kind of in that range. Montclair is going to wind up in that same range as well. Then we've sort of got like the next tier of public out-of-state schools. So West Virginia, Binghamton, some of the Pennsylvania publics that are not named Penn State or Pitt. So like East Stroudsburg, Kutztown, Bloom, Westchester, other schools like that. They're kind of in that 40s range. There's a really cool thing going on right now with some of the SUNYs, not including SUNY Binghamton, but SUNY Albany, Buff State, a bunch of the other ones. You might have seen the billboard on the highway where it's like, oh, SUNY's doing like this match program. So they're matching Rutgers' tuition rate at some of the SUNY campuses. But it's important to know not all of the SUNY campuses, so not Bing, but Albany is matching. So that's something that students can look at. Some of the other schools that are, some of those other ones I mentioned have great promo rates like that as well. Then we move into kind of like your next tier of publics. So like Ohio State, Maryland, Pitt, University of Vermont, a lot of those other places, they're kind of in the 50s somewhere. Then when we look at privates, Rider recentered recently, so they're winding in the low 50s. Most of them are really in the 60s, 70s, and 80s though. So that's kind of the real talk about like what the sticker price is at schools. Are students paying the sticker price? It depends. We absolutely do have students that are paying this sticker price at these schools every year. Absolutely. Many of the students who attend schools like University of Maryland, they're paying sticker price there as well. Students who attend Rider, very few of them are paying sticker price there. And that is because Rider has a very robust scholarship program. We did an instant decision day this year. Every one of our students who was admitted that day got a scholarship of $20,000 to $25,000. So that kind of came right off the top. So those students are not paying sticker price. Ohio State, some of our students who go there are paying sticker price. Others, Ohio State is one of the few out-of-state publics that offers a fairly attainable merit scholarship for out-of-state students. So we do have quite a few students who are getting some scholarship to go to Ohio State as well. So I mentioned the word scholarship. That's considered a type of merit-based aid that is based on typically what you've already done, right? So your academic record, maybe your SATs or ACTs. You may be getting a merit scholarship also based upon activities or community service or some kind of special talent or something like that. Some schools are automatically considered. Other schools, you have to do a separate application. Deadlines are typically early at a lot of schools. So a lot of those November 1st, November 15th deadlines, they often align with early action deadlines. They're not always. In general, scholarships are more generous at private colleges and universities. Remember, I just said like almost all those students going to Rider got scholarship. We have a lot of students going to all kinds of private schools, and their tuition strategy is that many students or most students get scholarship. Out-of-state public schools are the hardest places, maybe not quite the hardest because New Jersey, but some of the hardest places to get scholarships. Most of those out-of-state public schools are not giving scholarships to students from out of state because their job is to service the students within their own state. So they may have some scholarships for out-of-state students, but it's typically the very top applicants. So for instance, we do have some students at University of Delaware get scholarship. It tends to be students who are kind of in their honors program or honors college level. University of Maryland offers scholarships. Not very many of our students at all receive scholarship there. Hold on one second. I think I may have just lost connectivity. I'm just going to jump on over into my other speakers because I think I lost my ears here. And otherwise, we've got need-based aid. And for need-based aid, and just message if no one can hear me because I'm hopeful that you can. For need-based aid, that is based upon a financial aid application. That's based on how much you make and potentially what you have in terms of assets. That is a FAFSA application, a CSS profile, perhaps a school-specific application. It varies by school. That is going to be loans, grants, work, study, etc. And that's something students reapply for each year. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. We're going to have a session in the beginning of the fall with a member from a college who will kind of go over all of the FAFSA details. Our one from last year is posted online, so that's a great one to read. It'll be looking at your 2022 tax information. So the stuff that you're filing now is what you're going to use on your tax forms. I do anticipate that there is going to be a change that will allegedly actually happen next year for the FAFSA, in that going forward, the plan is that students will be providing parental information if their parents are divorced or unmarried for the household that provides the most financial support for the student, regardless of where they live. So that is a change from what is taking place now. Another big change that is set to go in next year is that the FAFSA is supposed to no longer care about how many additional students you have in college. These were all part of the FAFSA Simplification Act that was passed last year or 2 years ago. It's kind of like a staged release. It's supposed to go in for next year. All bets are off as to whether it actually does, but I'm kind of operating under the assumption that it will. Some other schools look at the CSS profile. That is a much more detailed financial aid application. It tends to be more private, highly selective private institutions, some highly selective publics. There's a list of which schools require it. I kind of feel like that's like looking under the mattress. They really care about like all the details. They want to know like what car you drive, how old it is. They want to know about the value of the home that you live in. They want to know about non-custodial parents, etc. So way more details. How things work. You fill out these applications next fall, beginning in October. Federal government processes your FAFSA. You get back this thing called the student aid report. Currently, it's called the EFC that you get. That's the number. That's the amount the federal government alleges you can pay for each year of your kid's education. It probably does not represent reality in your household, but it's what they think. That terminology is also going to change. That's going to be the student aid index, I believe, for next year. So that's going to be a little bit different. Schools are essentially looking at their cost of attendance minus what government says they can pay, and that gives a total, which is your demonstrated need. So this is how they're determining how much need they have. So when schools say they meet need, then that's the number that they're trying to fill. The reality is that most schools in the US do not meet need. Most schools are going to leave you with some amount of need that is unmet. And so don't be surprised when that is there, when you're like, the cost of attendance is $70,000, my estimated family contributions $20,000, you know, like you've given me $20,000 of scholarship, $5,000 of loans, like what else? The answer is they're not giving you anything else. And that is, you know, kind of the reality for students mostly in kind of that middle class, unfortunately. So you really do have to be careful with where you're applying and the schools, the price tags, and also the scholarship strategies to work on kind of closing that gap down some. What to expect if you would call yourself middle of the road Hillsborough or above. The federal government's really only going to give you federal loans. You're not getting grants from the federal government. The freshman year maximum in terms of student loans that come from the government in the student's name is $5,500 a year. Your estimated family contribution needs to be, I believe it's about $6,200 in order to be able to get federal Pell grants. State aid. If you're middle and upper income Hillsborough families, you're not getting state aid either. We do have Hillsborough families that do receive state aid in the form of tuition aid grants. Where most of your aid is going to come from for most of our families is institutional aid. So that's where you got to focus. That can include merit-based aid and need-based aid. Everybody calls need different. So if you make $200,000 a year, Princeton calls that need. Rutgers will laugh at you. That's not need for them. What is need for Rutgers, though, is that they have a great program called the Scarlet Guarantee for families that make $100,000 a year or less, where they kind of have like a graduated scale of how much institutional aid you'll receive that is not loans. So that's fantastic. There's a couple other schools in New Jersey that have similar programs, the Kane Promise, I think Stockton has one, a couple others. Rutgers has the highest cutoff, I think, with 100,000. Most of the other schools, New Jersey Publics, it's like 80,000. There's also for students who are in that, I think it's 65,000 or less range. Currently, there's the Community College Opportunity Grant where you can go to RVCC for free as well for years 1 and 2. And then the New Jersey Publics all have something that kind of transitions that for years 3 and 4 as well. So if you're kind of in those lower brackets, there are some great options within New Jersey schools. And I really encourage you to look at those because those options are not going to exist for you out of state. Because remember, you are not you're not their person to serve. Their people to serve are people within their own state. So you want to look at some of those programs here to really maximize the amount of aid you're getting and minimize the amount of that you're paying out of pocket. Otherwise, we've got outside aid. So that's aid that you're finding on your own, outside scholarships, private loans, etc. What are some resources? Every school out there is obligated to have something called the net price calculator on their website. I encourage you to do those. Pick a public, pick a private, pick an out-of-state public, bang those out. See what they say about how much money your student would be paying to attend that institution, what your aid package would look like. If ever the words early decision cross your mind, do the net price calculator at that school. Because when you get that acceptance package, you're going to get that financial aid package and you have what seems like 5 minutes to deposit at the school. And if that aid package is not what you were hoping, now you've got a crying kid who is thrilled to get into an early decision school. And now you're saying they can't go because the aid package sucks. And so if you've done that net price calculator, you at least have some leverage for a conversation with a financial aid office. If that package that you got doesn't resemble that net price calculator that you did, at least you've got a starting point. To maybe see if there's anywhere that you can get to a point that your student can actually attend that early decision school that they were so excited that they got into. So that is a huge tip for our ED applicants. There's some other resources here in terms of financial aid. There's an EFC calculator, federal aid estimator, et cetera, that you can do at any time to start getting an idea about what you are or are not eligible for. Then we've got scholarship resources. First thing, most scholarships are for seniors. Junior scholarships that are out there tend to be super duper highly selective, on the order of more selective than Harvard, or lottery based, or somehow contest based, like an essay contest, etc. I do include those types of scholarships. When I find things like that, I'll include them in those opportunities newsletters that I send out to students in grades 9 through 11. So you can check those out. Here's some good reputable sites that you can look at for scholarship opportunities. You can certainly bookmark some things that look good for next year. You can also check out Raise Me. That is a site that's out there. Some schools participate in that, where students can earn micro scholarships towards certain schools if they go. That's things that you do need to do now. So that is something that's kind of a ahead of time thing, not just a scholarship thing. So basically you're putting in your information throughout high school, or now because you're hearing about it in junior year. And let's say you winds up, like Northeastern participates. Let's say you winds up getting into Northeastern, you can apply the micro scholarships from that to your aid package. It works differently at every school. At some schools, I'll be honest, I'm not really sure that you get any more money than you would have gotten already in merit scholarship. I think that sometimes I feel like they're just calling it something different. But at other schools, they do allow you to apply it on top of other aid. So that could be something to do if you're kind of wanting to do something that might get you some money down the road at some schools. So check that one out. And then we do have lots of other opportunities that I tell students about throughout their senior year. We just kind of switched gears to that, and I sent that stuff out yesterday for seniors. So I've given you some directions of some things to do this year. Kind of wrapping up, and I think we're getting close. Everybody's been doing great on my Q&A, so we don't have kind of a standing list there. So big things. Where do people screw up? Where do they go wrong? Opting out. Students who don't engage in school, they don't show up to group. When their counselor sends them passes for individual meetings, they don't respond to multiple emails. They blow them off throughout end of junior year and senior year. They typically wind up very dissatisfied with their application process and their results. Students who are really disorganized have a hard time, and who are not kind of seeking out opportunities to help themselves get more organized. That creates a lot more stress than it needs to. Students who are kind of like doing their own thing and just like not following directions and like trying to like just kind of like go down their own road, they wind up having a really hard time. And like, that's when I'm emailing them and I'm like, hey, by the way, I happened to see your status at UDEL and we didn't even know you applied and you didn't self-report your grades. Like, what were you doing? And then they don't answer because they don't check their emails. So that's another application pitfall, not checking your email. It's not on here, but that's another big one. Too many applications, those are all things that really leave students unhappy with their results and really having a super stressful senior year. We know that some of our families use private counselors, private consultants. It's okay. It's fine. We get it. You can be honest with us. Tell us that you're using somebody. We're not going to be insulted. If you are going to use somebody or some number of somebody's, really look for, my recommendation for you is that you look for people with qualifications, part of professional organizations, people who do this, especially if you're looking for kind of an all-encompassing package, somebody to help you build the list, help you with the applications, help you with all of that stuff. You want somebody that like, this is what they do. They visit schools, like this is their profession. If you're going to find somebody, figure out what your needs are and look for somebody that does that. So there are people that really are comprehensive. There are people that focus on just the applications. There are people that really focus on just the essays. So figure out what you need and find somebody that meets that need. My big thing is that if you are paying for that advice, use it. You're still welcome to come and answer me questions, but don't come fishing around, asking me for opinions, asking other people for opinions, kind of shopping things around. You've spent hours and hours and thousands of dollars working on this essay with somebody, and now like you're making all kinds of changes. If you don't trust what they're telling you, you're not confident in their info, it's a really good time to step back and think, why am I paying them? If you're paying them, you need to trust that the information that they're giving you is accurate, and they're helping you put your best foot forward to what you said you wanted. And so make sure that you're kind of keeping that in mind. That being said, if you are using somebody outside of here, you can't opt out of our stuff completely. Fine, tell Ms. Flag, I am working with somebody outside of here, so I don't need help building a list. That's cool, that's fine. But you know what? You still got to do that brag sheet, the teacher letters of recommendation, etc. You can't just kind of march to your beat of your own drum and then seem surprised later when we're like, hey, we didn't do any of your stuff because we didn't even know you were applying to school. So you still got to stay engaged with us. Parents, we talked about before a little bit. Remember, this is a student-led process. Again, I've been doing this a long time, both in admissions, as a school counselor, and now here. It's really, really important that your student is taking the lead here. They should be contributing colleges to their list, completing their applications. They need to be the ones contacting colleges, etc. That's who schools want to hear from. When a student is on the waiting list, they don't want to hear from mom and dad. They want to hear from the student. That is always going to get a student much further. I can tell you that even as me, like parents, I'll talk to you, but I won't talk to you without your kid, because it's their process and they're the ones who are going through this, and they need to be at every meeting that I'm having. And honestly, the majority of my conversation is directed at them because they own it. They're the ones who are going to school. If you cannot trust them to do their application, You really need to think about whether or not you trust them for a $30,000 to $80,000 a year education, and also think about the message that you're sending for them when you're taking everything over for them, which is, I don't think you can do this. And that's not what we want to do. We want to build them up and let them know how much we trust them, how much we believe in them. Yes, we're checking in with them. So perhaps we're doing like weekly check-ins on Sundays, and that's fine. But that's very different from taking over and doing it for them, which will ultimately leave them unprepared for success in college, which is not what we want. We want them to go off to wherever it is that they're going to go and be successful, be able to stand on their 2 feet as an adult at that next place. We kind of talked about who our school counselors are, but for those who didn't catch it earlier on, here's kind of a view of who our school counselors are. I'm going to cycle back now. I think that's the end. And then I think we are actually pretty good. So if we have additional questions, now is the time to pop them into Q&A, and I'll stay and answer a few more. There is a survey on the screen. I really appreciate if you are able to do that. That would be fantastic. Again, groups starting next week on Monday. So students watch your emails for a group invite from your school counselor. And we're super excited to get started with you all. And if you have questions, again, you can just pop them on into there and I'll either answer them out loud or we'll type back a response. Otherwise, have a fantastic night. So I did just get a question about volunteering. What if you don't have any volunteering hours yet? As I mentioned earlier, there's no magic number. Some students who are applying to college have volunteer experience, community service, others don't, and that's okay. Now that being said, usually that's going to reflect in the type of school a student is applying to. So if you see some schools out there have a significant focus on service, so that expectation for those students is that going to be that they have community service experience in their high school throughout their high school years. But my guess is if your student doesn't have that and they haven't done that at this point, that's not really what they're looking for, and that's not going to be a great fit in terms of the school. So what they should do though is emphasize the other things that are part of their application and the other things that they have done. It won't work for you to click on the link. It'll work if you click on the link. If you open the actual presentation, you should be able to scan the QR code to get to the survey. And also when you click out of Zoom, it should link you. I tried to make it so it'll link you to the survey, hopefully. I have a question here about the average HHS GPA. Usually the midpoint is somewhere around a 95 weighted GPA. We don't have that on a 4.0 scale because we do not use a 4.0 scale at Hillsborough High School. Have the SUNY schools confirm that promo for next year? I'm not positive. You might want to check their website. So I feel like if you Google like SUNY Rutgers match, I think you'll be able to find it and see if that is confirmed for next year. There's some other great places that typically have neighboring student discounts, East Stroudsburg, Kutztown, a couple of the other Pennsylvania publics. University of Maine has a great match as well, or a really competitive program, scholarship program too, that brings you close to the Rutgers rates. So that can be a great option for a kid that really kind of wants to get out of Jersey, but is not looking to spend a ton. Ooh, okay, so there's a question that came up about kind of graphic design, and I'll expand that to also kind of like audition-based programs, portfolio-based programs. So students who are looking at programs in the arts, hopefully they have engaged in some, sorry, I gotta take the glasses off, some art-based coursework at the high school, and I'd really encourage them to connect with the art staff. Could be a good idea to think about. We do offer a course, 2 related courses that are possibilities for senior year, AP Studio Art. If they haven't taken that, that could be a good option. There's also a portfolio course that a student could take. Otherwise, our folks within the art department, Bober, Contrino, Gavsey, it's Kidash, they're all experienced with students who are applying to art programs. They can assist there in helping students to, put together those portfolios. Students in the music programs, you know, could certainly use our staff within the high school. They all have experience with putting students into, you know, highly selective music-based programs, but I do find that many of the students, especially those going on to performance, are also working with folks outside of school, typically their private voice instructor, private, you know, instrumental instructor, et cetera. Any recommended number of takes for SATs, ACTs? You know, as I said, we recommend everybody try it once and kind of go from there. Realistically, I see students' scores move very little by the time they've taken it like a third time. There's not a restriction that you can't take it more times than that, but I often find that's where we get to the point that the amount of effort that a student is expending and cost in taking the test and kind of opportunity cost is not, I would say, working out or evening out with what they're seeing in terms of a score. So what I'll often find is once they've kind of taken it a couple times, maybe something will go up 10 more points, which is great if you needed a specific number for something. But if you didn't need a specific number for something, and now you've spent like another 30 hours studying, I just think in senior year of all the other things that you could be doing with that 30 hours that would have made a way bigger difference on your application than 10 SAT points. And there's a lot of things you could have done instead. What types of GPA scores, et cetera, are recommended for BSMD programs? Typically we'll typically have 2 to 3 students get in a year. Typically students who get into BSMD programs have SAT scores that are somewhere within the 1500s. Typically have all honors, all AP schedules for all 4 years for the most part in almost all subjects, have taken multiple AP science courses, have extensive experience in volunteering in the health sciences, demonstrated science interest in their extracurriculars, etc. So that probably gives you a pretty good idea. If you go online to my website, on the left, I think, there is a link for special programs, and there's a link right underneath that for accelerated medical programs. And there's a lot of resources there, including a link to a video presentation I did last year with a student from Medical Minds, where we talked about applying to those programs. So that's a really good resource to see kind of what's out there. Okay, what about extracurriculars? Do I recommend stopping them in junior year, or continuing on if something was, you know, what you're doing? If you like what you're doing, keep doing it. If it is killing you every day and you really hate it, stop. You know, it's absolutely fine. Everybody's interests change. I think if you talk to us as adults, how many of us are in jobs that we were in when we graduated colleges? And the answer now is not a whole lot. So, you know, there's an understanding that students' interests and passions and things like that change, and they want an opportunity to explore new things. And so that's absolutely something that you can do. You know, but and sometimes what I've especially seen, I would say, you know, through the pandemic too, is that especially in the last 2 years, I saw students who were involved with some things prior to COVID, and then kind of coming out of COVID really transitioned away from some of those school-based activities and moved more towards work and individual activities. And that's okay as well. It certainly didn't hurt them in the application process over the last couple of years. So it's okay if things change. All right, it looks like we are pretty wrapped up here. So thank you so much. Have a fantastic evening. This video will be posted probably sometime next week. When I am back in the office, it'll be on my YouTube, and an email will come out to everybody. Thanks. Have a great night.